Ms. Helen Arnold, how are you?
I am fine, thank you, Sam. Had a busy day counselling, but I'm good.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate. I know how intense your work can be sometimes, so no, we do appreciate you sacrificing an hour and a half of your lovely time to be with us. And you're coming to us from Loughborough, is that right?
I am, yeah. I work in Loughborough and Nottingham, but my home office is Loughborough.
Oh, lovely. How's the weather been in Loughborough? Because we've had a bit of cloud and overcast around here in Yorkshire.
It's been so great. Actually, the central heating came on yesterday. It's just been so cold. It's just, yeah, it's grey. Yeah, I call it Loughborough grey.
Loughborough grey.
Yeah.
Not the same as I've got a collaborator from Manchester, and I say to him, is it whenever it's raining? I say, is it raining or is it Manchester rain? Because in my mind, Manchester's where rain was invented.
Yeah.
I feel like their rain is a bit different to the rest of the country.
Yeah. I think Loughborough does have its own special kind of grey. Yeah.
So for those who are unfamiliar with you and unfamiliar with our work, can you tell us just a bit about yourself? Who is Helen Arnold, and what's your story?
Well, I'm a counsellor now. Many years ago, I trained at Elmhurst and Arts Ed. Crashed and burned, really, because I was a traumatised child and not really, I guess, suited to the environment at the time. Yeah, went through life, had kids, did all that stuff, and now I'm a counsellor. I did a degree a few years ago because I realised the value of mental health, actually, and how far a bit of support and talking and being heard can go, what a difference it can make. Yeah.
Absolutely, and you've got a very personal relationship to the performing arts, haven't you?
I have, yeah. Apart from my own crash and burn experience, yeah, my daughter is a performer, and her fiance, and therefore quite a lot of people that I know and that I love work in the arts, and of course I'm still connected to people that I went to school and college with, and lots of them are busy bunnies.
Absolutely. Grand. So, Dean, do you want to kick us off with the first question?
I think that'll be a good idea.
Yeah.
Right. So, Helen, can you give us a rough outline of what the main issues are that performing arts professionals should be aware of as we come out of lockdown?
Gosh, I feel like performing artists themselves are going to be the experts on this. Gosh, it's such a tough industry anyway, isn't it? But one of the things I think is really important that I think people don't think about is that actually we're a traumatized population, not just performing artists, everyone. Trauma, the definition of trauma is any experience that causes fear and or pain, that doesn't have the opportunity to be worked through, to be processed, to be integrated into your life experience. And it kind of crept up on us, didn't it, the whole COVID thing. So I think that's really important, and the effects of trauma are things like struggling to be creative, that's a real problem, focus, self-esteem, which is often an issue anyway, when you're putting yourself out there in the industry. It can have a problem on relationships. It highlights all sorts of other mental health problems, so anxiety and depression. And in fact, anxiety and depression are illnesses of unexpressed feeling and creativity. So it's sort of become a bit of a cycle for lots of people. I know lots of people who are performing artists who have a tendency maybe towards anxiety or depression anyway. It's a very provoking, triggering industry. You're putting yourself out there, you're being rejected, you're doing things that are difficult, there's a lot of pressure and expectation on you one way or another. And of course, then being isolated at home, and stifled and fearful. You know, COVID was scary, but also it's really scary in an industry where it's hard to make a living. Is it ever going to be the same again? You know, I think we were talking earlier before we came on air that the stage was really struggling. You know, reading the stage during lockdown it was really hard to find anything to say, except it's really scary, isn't it? It's really hard for theatre people. That's been really tough on people. I think issues with bodies, fitness, I mean, fitness to do your job, voices. I mean, you may have felt really motivated while you were in lockdown and done loads of exercise and kept on top of things, but it's very hard not to get lethargic in that situation. Any coping mechanisms you had before, eating or not eating, you know, having a drink, smoking, whatever it is you do, you may have had to fall back on that to help you cope. And that you can't just switch that off when you come out. So you might be coming out heavier or too thin. It's exacerbated a lot of people's problems. People
have been in a relationship where the two people have been isolated together, in effect. Does that tend to feed in and aggravate it, or can that be a support?
Well, relationships.
It depends on the couple.
I think it depends on the dynamic. It's been very hard on everybody, hasn't it? And again, the whole trauma and stress of being in an isolated setting, not knowing what's going on, doesn't help you relate. You know, it's affected people's sex drives, and if you're in a partnership, that can be a problem. I know people who have been locked down with partners who maybe aren't as loving as they should be, people in difficult or abusive relationships, or even relationships that have perhaps become abusive because somebody wasn't coping. So it can be really difficult. And of course, if that's going wrong and you're stuck at home, you might be in the middle of London, but if you're in your flat thinking of lockdown 1 and maybe feeling like you can only go out once a day for a walk, what do you do? And people also got really tired of texting and Zooming fairly quickly. You know, at first there was a big flurry, wasn't there? We were all kind of having Zoom coffee with our
novelty of like, oh, we're doing this on Zoom.
Yeah, yay, I can see my friend. Cheers. But actually, people quite quickly got really tired of that, and a real lethargy set in. And so any fear that you have, any insecurity in relationship or about yourself in relationship, which lots of us have, is magnified. You feel like you get lonely, even when you're there with a partner. You lose your little daily hits of, seeing somebody else, being able to have a bit of a moan about your partner. It's been very, very hard on relationships.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. When I speak to a lot of performers and performing artists regarding their mental health, particularly ones in big cities, I'm talking like the Londons and the Manchesters, less so in Nottingham, Leeds, like those kind of areas, but definitely in the bigger cities, they talk about a feeling of always needing to be on, always needing to be present, always needing to be, because even if you're just planning to go to your money job for the day and then go home, maybe read some lines or read a book or prepare for an audition the following day, you still feel like you have to be on. And speaking to a lot of them described the feeling that you'd think that a lockdown, knowing that there is no work happening, would kind of give you a minute to just, when actually a lot of them found the opposite. They found that if anything, they were more on because, well, I guess to use some of the language you were using earlier, they were in the trauma, they were in that fight or flight kind of defense mode, I guess.
Yeah. And it's something about flexibility and boundaries as well. In some way, we were physically boundaried really very, very tightly. So there's all the more pressure, I think, to be flexible with other people, to maybe kind of, sort of let your own personal boundaries go. I'm not saying necessarily do anything dodgy on Zoom, though people might have done that too, but to feel that pressure to not be yourself in that moment. And also there's been a real issue for me, which was driving me mad. In fact, I stopped doing social media during lockdown. Was this whole thing, well, it was a whole lot harder during the Second World War. We were only staying at home and watching Netflix, and person after person has talked to me about, well, lots of people have got it worse than me. So a lot of shame happening, and when there's shame, it's really tempting to kind of be too flexible, to be too up there, feel like you have to be too out there and what other people need you to be, because you kind of feel ashamed of feeling down, because there's all this sort of, well, I mustn't complain attitude. So yeah, that real pressure to not be the person that moans about it.
Keep calm, carry on. We're British. That's what we do. Yeah.
It's a stiff up. It's just saying stiff upper lip. Pip pip, mustn't complain in different language, really, and it's very English. Let's not talk about our feelings. We don't want people to think we're moaning. And of course, in the performing arts, you kind of need to be up and on, like you said, switched on all the time. How much more desperate you could feel doing that via Zoom.
Absolutely, yeah. It's the lockdown definitely perpetuated. Well, you've spoken about it, some of it before, like perpetuated insecurities that kind of already exist in the performing arts, and these cracks that we, as an industry, we're very aware of, but we either don't acknowledge them as much as we should, or we kind of treat them with oh yes, we're very aware. I'll use the example you used earlier, body image. We're very aware that as an industry, we can tell people, you've got to lose 5 stone or gain 3 stone to get this role. And the kind of the body dysmorphia and the mental health issues that perpetuate through that. What other kind of insecurities do you think the pandemic has perpetuated for these performing artists that are already kind of living in this very insecure industry and very insecure world?
Well, I think self-doubt can come into it a lot, can't it? A lot of people, people have been so resourceful, haven't they? It's a real myth, I think, outside the theatre and performing, that performers are somehow flighty and unreliable kind of types. But actually, of course, we know that people in the performing arts are generally punctual, reliable, incredibly hardworking, flexible to the point of not having very healthy personal boundaries at times. So I've lost my thread now. I'm getting so caught up with what I was saying.
I suppose you're kind of hammering home some of the insecurities that already exist, and these are the ones that could have been made worse, or probably have been made worse, and therefore, and now we're going to be dealing with some of the fallout of that. Coming out of lockdown, but definitely not in the post-pandemic world yet, I would say.
Yes. So sorry.
No. I didn't know my point. I just kind of.
So if you a lot of people were so resourceful. There were people with really pushing their side hustles. Actually, the stage helped with that, didn't it? All the people that are making things at home and selling them. People got jobs delivering for Tesco. I know people that suddenly were support assistants for very disabled children. Doing all sorts of work that they could. Which is great. It kept the wolf from the door. But while you're doing that, maybe you can't afford, and there aren't classes to go to. So are you keeping your creative muscles working? Maybe not. If you've got any kind of worries about yourself, and let's face it, we all do, and also doubt about, is this the profession for me? I really love it, I really want to do it, but God, this is hammered home, hasn't it? How it can disappear. So I think it can really exacerbate that. And maybe if you've got a job and you've actually had some regular money coming in, that I know of people who are thinking, well, actually, maybe it's time to call it a day. But actually, that's a really hard decision, isn't it? That's a heartbreaking decision. But having had the experience, maybe, of finding that other job, people are feeling maybe more of a pull than they once did.
Absolutely. I was speaking to a friend of mine who's a West End producer last week, or like about 5-6 days ago, And she was saying the big crisis at the minute in the West End is stage managers. They can't find stage managers. Stage managers have probably some of the most easy to evidence transferable skills in terms of time management, organization, good with spreadsheets, good with health and safety, very knowledgeable, very tech resourceful.
Yeah.
And basically all the good ones have been booked because they're, again, just trying to get shows going again. And or any, not even necessarily saying the bad ones aren't, but it's anyone else has either gone, I'm not in the industry anymore, or I'm already booked. And that's the big crisis at the minute. It's been less performers. It's actually been stage management is the big thing the West End is struggling with at the moment, which I found very interesting and very telling with, as you said, this, well, why am I putting myself through this?
Yes.
I'm reminded of during the, I think it was the middle of the first lockdown when there was a misunderstanding between a statement Rishi Sunak made, a statement that a Channel 4 news presenter made, and then the Department of Work and Pensions' new advertising strategy to get people to train in cyber. And basically it was conflated to be an attack on the performing arts sector.
I remember that, yeah. And there was that advert, wasn't there, with
Fatima's next job may be in cyber, and the storm that brewed up, when actually I'm thinking about it now, lots of performing artists professionals at the time had jobs outside of the industry and probably felt that, like, well, I don't want to give up on my aspirations in this industry, but similarly I've got to eat. But then, yeah, as you said before, what is that doing to their creativity? And what's the long-term damage that's going to carry through into now?
Yeah, well, that conflict, that pull in two directions is stressful, and of course stress hormones, cortisol and so on, just get in the way of creativity and relationship and
Absolutely.
I've spoken to a few people outside of the industry, and what they see of performers is very confident and outgoing people because they see them on stage.
Yeah.
The reality of that, when you meet a performer off stage, may not be exactly what you'd expected. Yeah. So, has the lockdown done anything either positive or negative for that sort of confidence and all the difference between how people are outwardly and how they are internally inside themselves?
Actually, in performers or the perception.
Yeah, I'm thinking particularly for performers.
I think it's quite individual, but my sense is that for a lot of people, it's really damaged confidence. Where the confidence was wobbly, I think it's done harm. I'm surprised at the resilience. I'm really impressed at the resilience of people, how they kept their heads above water and kept going. But if you're a performer, if you want to perform, if you're a creative of any sort, and you don't get to create, I wonder whether actually the gap we were talking about before, the being always having to be up and out there, I wonder whether actually there's a real risk, because that is possibly widening that gap with what's going on. Some people, I've known people, and this is not in my work, my counselling work, incidentally, because obviously I can't talk about clients, but other contacts who have had some crises, real mental health crises of one kind or another. But of course, if your agent calls, or if you get something, if you get a job, maybe it's on stage, whether it's big or small, you're kind of containing the expectations of a world that wants you to be out there and wants to be entertained. Audiences haven't seen anything live for ages, so you're having to contain that while maybe you're completely drained and empty. I think it's more of a problem.
Do you think then that the work that people have been doing on Zoom and doing sort of shows from home, has that exacerbated the problem, or has that managed to alleviate it a little bit because people are still being creative, but not necessarily in a way that they were used to?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's probably helped. How amazing have people been? It's like, you know, we had lockdown, and then it felt like a couple of days later there was all this great stuff out there. I think that must have helped in a way. I think with change, there's always a gain in change, and there's always loss. So even if a change feels like a negative change, sure, you're going to lose, but there will be some gain in it. So I suppose it depends on the individual, how much they've gained and they've lost. You know, as a counsellor, for example, I either went on to Zoom or it didn't work during lockdown. So we all switched to Zoom. And before that, working on Zoom wasn't a thing. Oh no, counsellors don't work remotely. No, we have to be in the room with a person. Lockdown came and I was up there doing the work. It's different, you know, and it will be the same for people producing art of whatever kind. It is different, but it enabled me to keep going. And actually, for me as a counsellor, it's something I'm going to continue doing alongside my face-to-face work. So there's gains and losses.
I want to pick up on something you mentioned earlier. You used a word that I have a very mixed relationship with, which is resilience.
Okay.
So I obviously I think resilience is very important, particularly in an industry that is, like, as soon as you mention to anyone, even someone who's never even been remotely interested in being in arts and the entertainment sector, as soon as you say, I work in this sector, or I want to work in this sector, they go, oh, it's hard. Oh, that's hard.
Yeah.
You gotta be real. So we came into this as children, almost knowing the resilience we needed to have.
Yeah.
But I've spoken to quite a few producers and friends of mine who in the performing arts, who say that they found that resilience is a useful phrase to use, but sometimes it can be used as a way for the system or the sector to put the blame on the individual.
Yes.
Your fault for not being resilient enough to stick at this. It's not because the industry has a problem with the way it treats women, or a problem with plus size bodies, or with ethnic minorities, or people from different class backgrounds. And I guess all our resilience has been tested by this, because as you said, we got told to stay at home, but it wasn't as simple as stay at home. It was overnight, our entire habits and identities just gone. And I guess I'm interested to know where for you is the line, do you think, between it's up to the individual's resilience and it's up to the system not working for the individual?
Wow.
I know we didn't prep for this. I am literally throwing this question. Disclaimer: this is not a question we prep. This is very much just me working on. I'm interested to hear Helen's perspective on this.
I think it's really interesting, Sam, and I think it's about empathy, and if I get going on empathy and the lack of empathy in society, we'll be here at midnight still. I think in industries or society pick up on words and then start to use it as a stick to beat people with. I mean, you know, there's all the stuff about whether you're politically correct or woke. It's the same kind of thing. Things that sort of started off meaning something meaningful, sort of became somehow turned into a weapon, didn't it? So yeah, I think there'll always be victim, and I don't like the phrase victim blaming, but I think there'll always be victim blaming. I'm trying to think of another word, like respect. You know, respect is important. Respect has been a word that's just bandied about, and it basically, you're not respecting me, basically means I'm not going to listen to you. You're not doing it my way. So it seems to be a bit of a human trait to turn concepts and language round to our own advantage. And I suppose people with power are likely to use that. I guess whatever it is, whether it's a word like resilience, or I'm just trying to think of some of the words when I was young, because it's all about being thin when I was young, and they were harsh about that. It's just about the way we treat people. I don't even like the be kind thing. It's not about being kind. In fact, it's what my daughter says, don't be a dick. It's not about being kind. It's about not being a dick. So I guess whether counsellors can say that in public, I don't know. So, you know, resilience is real. You know, we all have resilience. If you're using resilience as a stick to beat people and as an excuse to abuse people, well, that's abusive, isn't it? You can't take it. You can't take it. You're not resilient. It's abusive. So they're being a dick. It's not about be kind. It's about don't be a dick. And is that an answer?
Episode.
Absolutely, yeah. It's be kind, just don't be a dick. No, absolutely. I mean, I direct pre-pandemic. I used to direct at festivals, and that would be we always had 3 rules for the festival. Rule 1 was always don't be a dick. Look, we're all stuck with each other for a week in a field, so don't be a dick. And yeah, it's the #1 rule. Absolutely. So what would you say if a client was kind of turning that resilience attack on themselves? I'm thinking more from the perspective of performing artists who are, again, maybe they're questioning after the last year, do I want to still be in this industry because I'm broke and this last year's been hard, and actually I want to just get a 9 to 5 at least for another year or so. Or those performing artists and professionals who've left the industry and are now turning that stick on themselves because of the ingrained idea of resilience, as you must be resilient to be in the industry. If I was a client saying to you, well, it's my fault I wasn't resilient enough, what would your advice be in that context?
I would say to a client who said, I've stopped being a dancer or whatever, and I feel because I wasn't resilient enough, I would say, you got out when you needed to, and you found a way to hold life and limb together. That's resilience. You made a difficult decision and you're doing something else. That's resilience.
Beautiful. Yeah. Simple. Yeah. Don't be a dick.
It's about, that whole thing is don't be a dick. It's about power balance, isn't it? Whatever the word is that people use to beat other people, it's about power.
Yeah, absolutely. So Helen, if it's all right with you, we're going to move on to some questions that we got from some people that messaged in, if that's all right. Similarly, if any of our attendees want to chuck a question in the chat that they haven't sent ahead of time, feel free to. But we're gonna move to some questions that we've been sent in. So, Dean, do you wanna?
Yeah, this question, I like this question. I really like this question. In lockdown, things became simple. In other words, you didn't have to rush around everywhere to this audition, that casting, this rehearsal, all that sort of thing.
Yeah. And remember your mum's birthday, and remember your partner's anniversary, and remember your friend's got a show tonight, and you really should go and support him.
Yeah.
Among other things. So that'll become much easier and much more straightforward. But as we're coming out of lockdown and things are relaxing, and I use the word advisedly there, it's starting to become complicated again. Now, this person said it's having a negative effect on their mental health, and how can they get things back to being more simple again?
Wow. It's been quite a common issue, speaking generally, this coming out of lockdown and changing from simplicity, both contemplating it and actually living it. And I can't really, without knowing someone very well, say, well, do this or do that. We've lost a lot of, I guess, social muscle, social fitness, and brain fog is a real thing. from the isolation, and from that, surprise, surprise, comes lack of creativity, loss of the ability to problem solve, to focus, to multitask, and so I would say take things gently. If we think of like full-on life as a marathon, and like we've been on the sofa for 18 months, we don't run out of the door, put our trainers on and run headlong into it. We maybe do a little bit at a time. So I would say to anyone who's finding it stressful, and it was quite frightening for a while. I don't know about you guys. For me as a counsellor, when I was contemplating 6 months ago or something, I was allowed to have people at the office. It felt a little bit scary, actually, having people come to the office and managing all that. Be gentle with yourself, little by little, kind of build up your social muscle, change little changes to the way you do things. So you can't come out and suddenly make it simple. If you've liked the simplicity, but suddenly we're all expected, aren't we, to get back into life and it's as it is, in its glory. Do what you need to do to get by, but make small changes, one by one. You know, don't make big decisions maybe all at once. See people who build you up, who you feel really comfortable with. Maybe do something new, do anything creative. It might be something different to what you're trained to do. Just sort of start to kind of get your mind going. It will lift the brain fog, but if you're hard on yourself, it's not going to work. We're not dogs, but if you keep a dog in a cage for a year and a half, open the door and start shouting at it because it's not playing with the ball and sitting up and begging and doing all the things that you want your dog to do, it's not going to start doing those things. You're going to break it. You're going to break its spirit. So I guess sort of treat yourself with the same kindness you would someone else coming out of captivity, and make those changes one by one.
Absolutely.
Should people then make a change, let that settle, and become accustomed to it, and then make another change, rather than, I know this might sound a bit peculiar, but rather than making several small changes at once? Is that what you're saying?
I think do what you feel comfortable with. I think there's a real risk of getting into the whole self-improvement thing. And, there's brilliant podcasts and things out there, but they can also be overused and it can become like caffeine. So we think of ourselves as coming out of the lethargy that we've been in. It's not great to be kind of hyping yourself up and I need to be doing lots and lots and lots. So, if several small changes at once, feel comfortable. And kind of helping, by all means do that. I suppose you need to be self-aware. And I think something that as a counsellor I'm always saying is lean into your support network. People that you really, really trust, to sort of to be around and to bounce ideas off, and maybe to give you feedback about how you're doing.
Absolutely. So by contrast, I love this question, this next question, because this next question is something that was definitely an issue pre-pandemic, an issue that I know I've struggled with, and an issue that I'm seeing get worse a bit now from some of the things we were discussing earlier. So this one is from another Jozara member who says, now that the industry is starting to unlock, I'm noticing more and more of my friends are getting jobs.
Yeah.
I am not. This means I'm starting to compare myself to them, and it is having a detrimental effect on my mental health.
Yeah.
How can I stop comparing my career to others? You okay? How can I stop comparing my career to others?
Gosh, it's hard, isn't it? It's so competitive. I think, interestingly, I think at the moment, I know the government aren't talking about arts sector jobs, but that there's a lot of news out there about, there's more jobs than ever before out there. It's really great, but actually what they're not saying is that there are more people than ever before. So actually there are fewer jobs out there generally, I'm not just talking about the performing arts, there are fewer jobs per person looking than there were before. So, you know, the culture that we're in, the context that we're in is really important. So I guess you might be feeling that pressure. Oh, yeah, loads of jobs. Isn't it great? We're all out. We can do some stuff now. I think the really important thing is to use yourself as your evaluative standard. Psychology shows that if you're comparing yourself to other people, of course, you're always going to be different. We're unique. It's so hard to do, but use yourself as your evaluative standard. So when other people are getting jobs, you know, if you can choke out, you know, that whole be kind, don't be a dick thing. If you can, you know, be happy for that, or at least say happy things for that person. Use yourself as that standard. They got that job. Okay, that wasn't the job for you. Work on yourself and dealing with your own auditions or interviews or training to get back into shape. And also you need to remember that it's human instinct, it's naturally human to share success stories. So you're hearing everybody's successes, you're seeing the chipper, I don't know, rehearsal pics or whatever, you know, the tweets, you know, hashtag whatever. People are we're naturally going to share the success stories. What you're not hearing is all the people who are breaking the heart because they got down to the last two and then got dropped, or got it and then it didn't go ahead, or whatever. So try and bear that in mind. You know, you're going to get a deluge of the success story, more success stories than you are not so successful stories. So I guess maybe try and remember that, to sort of ground yourself and use yourself as your evaluative standard. You know, compete with yourself. There's no panacea for the feelings, except, of course, leaning into your support network, talking, being heard, listening to other people as well. That's so important.
Absolutely.
Human connection.
It reminds me of something that a director I was working with years ago. I was doing a show about social media back in 2014, before it was overdone. And the director said something that always really stuck with me, that he said, social media makes you compare your backstage to everyone else's on stage. Makes you compare your sitting in the dressing room crying alone to their polished, rehearsed, well-lit, makeup, costumed performance of what's going on. Yeah. And I think it's a very similar thing with career stuff of, yeah, you hear they got the part, and maybe it's a part you really wanted, or they got the job, they got to work with this director, they got to collaborate with this designer. But again, there's all the backstage stuff that happened before they got on stage and did that.
So it's a similar sort of thing to the Olympics that have just been on. You know, you see the three who get onto the podium, one of whom is very happy, the other two feel they've missed out on something, even though they might be the third best person in the entire world. So 3 out of 7 billion is a bit disappointing. And but you don't see well, I've had to be up at 4:30 every morning, and I've had to go running when I didn't want to, and I've had to fight through having a cold, and I've had to continue doing my training, whereas other people could just lay in bed and feel sorry for themselves, which is what I wanted to do. So, you know, I think that's a really, really useful tip to look at. You know, am I better than I was yesterday, rather than am I as good as, you know, Laurence Olivier or Alicia McKellen.
And of course, you take your whole self, don't you, into an audition. You know, you maybe really want that job, and for the most part, it's not personal. It's not about the person you are usually. It's just that they wanted someone slightly different on that day for whatever reason. That's so hard to take when you're putting yourself out there.
Absolutely.
That's the reality of it.
I've literally just finished doing a casting for a new show, and I made a point of we're gonna send feedback emails to everyone, then when I was writing the feedback emails, sometimes it was literally all I have is compliments.
Yeah.
You just weren't the right person on the day, or it's literally just because of this one thing that you cannot possibly change about yourself that is the reason we've gone with this person rather than you. That's nothing to do with you. Sometimes it's even, this is a very side tangent. I remember reading an article on the stage a few years ago about how some economists had done a study, and they found you were more likely to get a role if you auditioned in the morning or the afternoon, not if you were in the middle of the day. If you were between 11 and 2, you were less likely to get the role.
Right.
And then naturally the reaction was a load of agents then demanding their clients get morning and afternoon auditions rather than midday. But that in itself was an interesting thing of, and then agents' reactions to that of like, well, I can't tell my client that, can I?
No. And interestingly, when my daughter was training, it was a somewhat different atmosphere, obviously 30 odd years later. They were taught, you know, when you do an audition, go to the audition, have something lined up for if you get cut. So when you get cut, and it seemed really healthful. And these young people, obviously it was very hard, but she would go to an audition, she'd get cut, and she'd say, oh yeah, but I'd arranged to go and meet whoever for a coffee at that place that we really like. Really, really small things, small kindnesses, I guess, to yourself, rather than just kind of sitting with that rejection. It's hard, but it seemed to really work. I mean, when I was training, it was rougher and tougher at my time.
Absolutely. Similarly, I've got friends who do exactly that. They arrange to meet people, or they arrange to do a certain thing. I'm going to do this audition, then I'm going to go to the Natural History Museum.
Yeah.
I'm going to take myself out for lunch. I have another friend who has a little black moleskin notebook, and afterwards she'll find like the nearest bench or cafe or something and sit down and just kind of write notes and unpack how she felt about the audition.
That is brilliant.
Yeah. She'll do it for a practical sense of like, who was the director? Who was the casting director? Are these people that I've met before? Or are these people I'm going to meet in the future and therefore could run into in the future, and therefore can be like, oh, you auditioned me for that thing, and now here I am again.
Brilliant. Yeah.
As well as just unpacking, how did I feel in that room? Could I see myself working with them? Did I feel comfortable? Did I feel a bit antagonized? Did I feel nervous? Did I feel underprepared? And like unpacking that process so that she's still sitting with the emotions, but isn't sitting. The way I say it to my students is going outside to feel the rain on your face, but not staying out so long you get a cold and get sick.
Yeah, I love that.
I'm a director. Metaphors.
and funnily enough, you know, journaling, which is what that is something I sometimes recommend to clients. You know, write it down. It doesn't have to be articulate, doesn't have to be beautiful. You don't even have to keep it if you don't want to. You know, if you're afraid that someone else will read it, it's getting it out. And I guess I'm not saying that every time you get cut at an audition, it's a trauma, but you know, it's processing, isn't it? It's getting it out. It's not letting it rattle around, unheard and unintegrated. It's great.
Absolutely. Moving on to the next question, Dean.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this has already been answered, actually. We've had a question, Helen, which is, I'm definitely feeling brain fog. How do I get over it? I know you mentioned earlier about making but is there anything specific about brain fog that people can do?
Yeah, well, we've had degraded social interaction and isolation and everything. You don't even notice it happens, do you? I think during lockdown 1, we were also busy watching Netflix and kind of putting pictures of banana bread on Facebook. We kind of didn't notice it, but now we're sort of back in the world. We do, and being online, being on Zoom is harder work. So it's just about, I guess, gently unfolding yourself. It's only temporary. It won't last. It's about walking before you can run. Do what you can do to maximize your cognitive capacity. So like I think we've talked about life being simple, life's being quite small, so we haven't had to do lots of problem solving and stuff outside. So it's about small steps, trusting in yourself. It is only a temporary thing. You've been locked away, so it's not a permanent thing. Just little things, making changes, doing things differently. You know, even if it's, I don't know, slapping a coat of paint on one wall, or going to a different class for fitness, it will lift. You know, social interactions with people that build you up, rather than people that look you up and down and judge you, and it will lift. It's the impact of being locked away in a simple life. It will come back.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is in a similar vein to that, I think. But yeah, I'm interested to unpack this one. So many performing arts professionals have continued working throughout the lockdown in a completely different way to how they were trained. This means they haven't had a break, and a lot are learning to do whilst working, and are now facing burnout. In light of this, what do you suggest people do to avoid burnout? And they've added to that a link to the WHO, the World Health Organization's official definition of burnout. Since I believe it was start of this year, it's now become listed as an official medical condition, because there are so many millions of cases across the world now that are being experienced. But yes, I imagine you come across burnout cases quite often.
Yeah, and of course, burnout's a real issue for counsellors. We have to be, you know, we have to really, really work at self-care, because of vicarious trauma, and burnout is a big issue when you're sitting with everybody else's trauma and pain. I feel a bit like I sound like a broken record really with it, and counsellors are always talking about self-care. Self-care has been one of those, a little bit like being resilient, isn't it? Self-care it's been another stick that we get beaten with.
Might I put this in a slightly different context?
Yes.
I'm conscious that that counsellors have to have supervision in
Yes.
terms of professional supervision, which isn't not being supervised while you're working, but it's about being able to unpack this vicarious trauma. Like, is it helpful for individuals to have a mentor or somebody like that who they can use as that type of professional, so they can release things rather than let it build up into burnout?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head far more concisely than I could have done. Yeah, basically, as a counsellor, it's about talking and hearing, and being heard. Yeah, lean into your support network, not just Facebook friends, but the people that who you can trust, and people that know you, who can notice if actually, you know, you're not eating, or you're sounding really sour about your work, because that's part of burnout, isn't it? You start to get really cynical and jaded. So people that can feed that back to you. Of course, the counsellor, I always say a counsellor is a good person to talk to and to help you spot the signs, and for you to work out the best way out of it for you. I think communication and relationship is really important, and part of the problem, and really simplifying the way the brain works: left brain, right brain creative, generally, very general, creative, relational; left brain, goal oriented, achieving. We live in an incredibly left brain way in our society, so, you know, just finding ways to get that balance. You're more likely to get burned out, particularly as a very right brain person, which a lot of creatives are, if you're sort of trying to function in a left brain way. So find different ways to be creative, and nurture that part of you, because unexpressed feelings, unexpressed creativity lead to depression and anxiety and burnout.
Since you've opened the self-care box, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, what's your go-to self-care for yourself, Helen? What do you do?
I have to be so rigorous with it, and sometimes it just feels like, oh my goodness, it sounds really precious, but I have to, because I have a huge responsibility to my clients. It would be dangerous to have a burned out counsellor. I run. I'm a runner. Nice. I meditate. I have cats that I cuddle. I have a really wonderful support network of counsellor friends. I'm just really lucky with that. People that I can just text and say, oh my God, this just happened. And because with another counsellor you can talk confidentially about life. Those things. I'm a vegan. I think that helps, feeling really healthy and not virtuous. I don't think it's a virtuous way to be, but for me it works. Makes me feel kind of, healthy. I eat well. Yeah.
Massive. What's your self-care?
Yeah.
It's a very good question. Although I have just taken up breathing.
Yeah, Dean has a breath coach.
Seriously.
Who's a Jozara member.
And I didn't realise it took me 51 years to learn how to breathe.
It makes such a difference, Dean. It's part of therapy. It's part of counselling as well. Notice the people not breathing, sending signals to yourself that everything's not right if you're breathing up here. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I do find belly breathing is a very, very useful way of regulating everything. It brings your physiology back into some sort of balance, which then leads into your mental state as well.
Yeah, it's so important not to separate mind, body, spirit, and we do tend to. We go to a doctor if something hurts, or if we're feeling down, in fact, and get medication. It all works together. It's just so important to pull it all together and look after yourself. Oh, actually, I'm in therapy as well because I'm a therapist, so that's a good thing to do. So yeah.
Of course. For me, it's video games for me. Give me something to hit. I'm making my way through my favourite action adventure RPG series at the minute, which has 9 games in the series, and I'm replaying them all, and I'm loving it at the minute. Partly as well for me, it's a little bit of nostalgia as well because it's a series that amalgamates the Disney universe with like Japanese Final Fantasy and Square Enix games. So it's also a little bit of nostalgia in there of, okay, I'm going to go do this with Beauty and the Beast now. And then I'm going to go and hang out with Hercules. and then I'm going to watch this villain monologue about the nature of reality and existence. But look, Mickey Mouse is doing something cool. So
I do have the wonderful position of the people I share my house with as well.
Oh,
Sam being one of them.
Oh,
it makes a huge difference.
I'll edit that out in post. So our last question, unless any of our audience want to chuck in a question in the chat, but our last question, and we've kind of touched on a little bit of this throughout, but I guess it'd be good to kind of surmise some of the ones we've talked about and then add any more that you've got on your mind. But it's basically, what lessons and techniques should we carry forward into the post-pandemic world to protect our mental health?
Yeah, really important thing to think about. We've already covered talking. It's so important. We're hardwired to need to be in relationship, and we've been quite isolated or quite stuck with the same relationship for quite a long time. So being in relationship, talking, listening, don't underestimate the difference that it makes. And I can't remember. There are various organisations, aren't there, particularly for creative people in the arts, who can offer a phone service or phone counselling. Finding a counsellor, there's no shame in it, said the counsellor. And actually, those sorts of things, I think a lot of the things I'm talking about, the organisations that offer phone counselling to creatives, are low cost or free. There are a lot of organisations who offer, good quality counselling, who now do it remotely. So you can do that from home. And I'm thinking of, I volunteer at an organisation in Nottingham who, a year and a half ago, you'd have to have lived in Nottingham to go to the office every week to pay £15 to see your counsellor. Of course, now you can do that remotely, and relatively low cost. So that's Nottingham Counselling Service. There will be others that are similar. So get a counsellor. You don't have to commit forever. You might want to do just 6 weeks. So talking, being in relationship is really important. Have fun. We forgot,
something that people don't necessarily connect with it is not that if you go to see a counsellor, it's because you've got some major problem. The discussion can aid creativity, if anything, as well as being something that has got a therapeutic benefit.
Absolutely, yeah. I say all the time to people, it's counselling isn't for broken people. If you feel broken, a counsellor will help you. Seeing a counsellor doesn't mean you're broken. You're absolutely right, Dean. And studies show that actually being in a good relationship, having a good conversation, really being heard and hearing yourself say things out loud starts to develop new neural pathways in the brain. Yeah. It starts to change the brain, it gets things firing. So why not? And I'm talking about low cost options because I know it's a really hard way to make a living in the arts. But there are those low cost options. But of course there are loads of counsellors in private practice too. And like you mentioned earlier, Dean, there are probably all sorts of mentor schemes. And also you've got your support network. And don't forget to have fun. Fun is so important.
Absolutely, fun and play. Yeah. But as you were saying earlier, like being mindful of, I suppose, being mindful of no one's expecting you to go back into all the fun that we had before, but instead of building up that muscle, you called it social muscle. Going to the social gym a bit instead of going on a big night out with 8 friends, going for a light coffee with one. And things that have got in the way of that is things like masks. We're hardwired to look at each other's faces, and so people wearing masks we're sending each other danger signals. So all the time we've been neurocepting danger, but now, which has been anxiety provoking, now we're in a situation where some people are still feeling at risk and are maybe wearing masks, or some places where you have to. Some people aren't. That's creating conflict. So maybe have some conversations with people, and if it's not going to work, if you don't want to wear a mask and they're really scared, maybe that's not the person to hang out with at that time. Choose what you do. Be careful with yourself. Absolutely.
Don't be a dick.
And don't be a dick.
Don't be a dick.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
Don't be a dick, because there's enough dicks in the world. We don't need more.
I really don't know whether that's I think the BACP might distance themselves from that counselling motto, but and find ways to ground yourself. Mild anxiety is quite can make you quite productive, actually, and can stimulate you to action. Bad anxiety obviously can be crippling. You can have those really terrifying moments. Simple techniques like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. So if you feel it building, just take a moment to notice 5 things you can see, whatever that might be. 4 things you can feel or touch. 3 things you can hear. 2 you can smell, and 1 you can taste. Take a breath. Blow it out.
I've never even heard of that technique. That's a great one. That's a great one.
Very helpful.
Steal.
You can have it. It's not mine.
Amazing. We have no questions in the chat, and no more extra questions there. Dean, do you have any extra questions for Helen?
No. What I would like to say though is that I think this has been a very successful first under the spotlight.
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
I think Helen has been wonderful as a guest,
Mm.
very, very helpful and very informative. So thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome. You've been a lovely host. It's been fun.
Oh, stop it. I mean, keep going, but stop it. Yes, let's give a silent round of applause for Helen Arnold.
Well, for you. I'm doing it for you, not for me.